My Gavan and Melonin, and well met indeed. I am Arike Galadriel, and with me today is Jessica, and we are going to talk about the Rings of Power. Jess convinced me that this is a almost once in a lifetime, really, isn't it, since the last Lord of the Rings, and that it would be foolish for a channel which has based itself on Lord of the Rings to not talk about the Rings of Power. But rather than do a breakdown of the episodes or drone on about what I hated or loved about it, instead we thought it would be better to just come at it from a purely academic point of view. So Jess had a load of questions while we were watching episodes 1, 2 and then 3. And she asked me them, obviously, as we were going through. But then we thought perhaps, or Jess thought, that it would be a good idea if she posed those questions. And so we can do this sort of podcasty kind of thing where we talk about each episode and some more of the background and backstory behind it. So we're not going to trash the episodes. We're not going to tell you what we loved about them. We're just going to talk about the actual lore behind the episodes. Would you say that is correct, Jessica?
Yes, I had loads of questions relating to the Rings of Power because I don't know as much as I thought I did about Lord of the Rings. And there were just lots of little things that I didn't really understand. And I realised that not all of it is going to relate to the lore of the Amazon show. But I just like knowing the background info and seeing how then it fits into the show or doesn't fit. I just like knowing extra information. And because I was asking Galu so many questions, I then wanted or thought it would be better if we then proposed for everyone to know those questions, and then if anyone else had questions you could then ask them and we could answer them in later episodes. I say I won't be, but
yeah. So today's episode will cover episodes 1 and 2 because they released at the same time, so it just makes sense. And then we hope to cover every episode as we go through, just talking about the lore. Ideally, it'll be about 30-ish minutes long, something like that. Nothing too strenuous. And we'll just cover some of the questions that Jess had. But it's not restricted just to Jess. If you have questions about any episode, comment them down below and I will reply and give you my thoughts. I would just caveat this, because I'm going to say it a lot, is obviously Amazon has totally jumbled the storyline from a chronological perspective. So lots of questions that people might have are probably going to be answered with a very simple line of that was Amazon's decision. But we'll see as we go through it. Comment your own questions down below and we can get to those in the future. Let us know if you enjoy this, of course, and if you think of anything that you would do differently. Hopefully there's some images and bits and bobs flashing up on the screen as we go through. But otherwise, you can fire away with your first question on episode number 1.
Okay. So the first question that I had was when we saw Galadriel. Now, I realised that I was probably wrong with my assumption, but I had assumed that Galadriel was magical in some way. I'm sure that in the Fellowship films or the Lord of the Ring films, which I realise are the films and not the lore, she whispers to people and they can hear her whispering and they're all like, oh no, someone's whispering to me. And I thought she was magical. But
Yeah, so no, Galadriel isn't Galadriel is mystical like most elves, but she's not like a wizard. She doesn't have specific magical powers. And from the films, when she whispers into people's heads, or rather when she talks directly into their minds, that part I must confess I can't recall if that's in the book or not, but I don't think it is. But no, she's not. She's a powerful elf, don't get me wrong. She's got bloodlines from a lot of, well, in fact, all 3 elven families. She's a very well-renowned elf. She does a lot of things, and she's a primary candidate for the main character. But she's not super magical or anything. No, she's not going to be growing trees just by looking at them or things like that. She's mystical like all elves, but nothing extreme.
Okay, I have a question on Elrond, but I'm going to come to that because I thought he was special too. My other one, relating the same time frame of what the episode had, was that there are the 2 trees that we're shown. I cannot remember their names, but they shine brightly. Is that because they're like the sun and the moon? Do they not have a sun and a moon, and all the light comes from them? So then when they have to leave, and that you see the tree falling and all the leaves falling off, they then have no light in that area, and that's why they have to leave. Or is that just symbolic, and the sun will come back, and it's just darkness because there's darkness in the area from Morgoth.
Morgoth, yeah. So, yeah, no, the trees are the replacement for the sun and the moon. Or not the replacement, they're the precursor. So the sun and the moon are created later. So originally the world was lit by 2 giant lamps. There's one in the north of the world and there's one in the south. And the lamps fell, and then the Valar decided that they would light their homeland only. So they created these trees and they grew them. One tree shone first, and that was the mark of time. So when the tree first flowered is when time began. And then the second tree followed. And then, yeah, they're basically the sun and the moon. So one tree has a golden light, one has a silvery light. And they only lit up Valinor. So Middle-earth was in darkness except for the stars. So it was just like perpetual nighttime. And then, yeah, Morgoth destroyed the trees and he ran away. And so that's when they decided, right, we need something a bit more permanent. And much like in Greek mythology, two Maiar went up into the heavens, and one leads the sun around and the other one leads the moon around.
Oh.
So and then that's when the sun first rose is when our history begins. So one sun year is like our year, 364 days, but one Valian year, which was based on the trees, is like roughly 9 of our years. So the timeline at the beginning is a bit iffy, but yeah, the trees were the precursor to the sun and the moon.
Right. So was there like nothing living on Middle-earth before
No,
that?
there were things living there, just difficult.
Just different.
Because there's no starlight. Tolkien doesn't go into that much detail, but like the only time we ever really read about it is when the elves first wake up, because they're literally lying on their backs. The first things they see are the stars. And so then the elves really revere Yavanna, who's the Valar of the stars, because they're literally the first things they saw. So they are sleeping on the ground because they've been put there by Eru Ilúvatar, and then they wake up and they see the stars. But yeah, if you actually dove down into it, how much life really can exist if starlight is the only way you get light? Like, would trees survive if there's just starlight? That's another thing where Tolkien died before he had an opportunity to expand on this. I don't think trees would survive without sunlight. So that would make you think the elves awoke to this barren wasteland because there's only stars. But then there's magic in Middle-earth, so that probably solves that. Let's just write magic next to that comment, and that's why there's trees.
I think you'd have some trees, because there are places on Earth today where they don't have... the sun doesn't rise.
Yeah.
Well, they're not. Are they completely in darkness? I can't remember now.
Yeah,
but there's nature there.
Yeah.
So there must have been some. It just wouldn't have been maybe flourishing. Anyway. Okay, so my next question was, did all the elves move to Middle-earth, or did some stay behind?
No, so most stayed behind. So when the elves awoke, they lived in the Far East, and then the Valar came and found them, or rather Arome came and found them, and he took them to the west. And a small section of them stayed there at that point. They're called the Avari elves. And then as they moved west, more of them broke off and they became the Sylvan elves. And then they made it to Beleriand in the west of Middle-earth, which hopefully Jess will show you a map of while I'm talking about this. And then more of them broke off again and they became the Grey elves, or the Sindar. They're grey because they saw the light of the trees from across the sea, but they never actually saw the trees. So they're given, like, they're not in darkness like the Avari, because Avari elf literally means dark elf. They're not in darkness, they're in greyness because they can see light, but they're not directly underneath it. So they broke off. But then the bulk of the elves went across the sea to Valinor. And so in Valinor, there's 3 families. The Noldor are the most famous and the ones that we will deal with a lot. The Vanyar barely ever come into the story. They're like the teacher's pet of the elves. And then the Teleri are the beaten down and bruised elves, as many people will know. And it's primarily the Noldor, the middle family, that come back. And Galadriel's a Noldor. All of her family are. Elrond's Noldor. Although, as I say, Galadriel has blood from all the families. But most elves are of one of those 3. They're either Vanyar, Noldor, or Teleri. And only really the Noldor came back. So Valinor still has the lion's share of elves in the world.
Right, and they have nothing to do with Middle-earth.
No, nothing at all. They come back a couple of times. Maybe only actually once. They come back in the War of Wrath. And I think that's the only time they come back. Off the top of my head, yeah. Okay. So it's all the stories we're following are basically the Noldor stories, or the elves that already stayed behind. So the Sindar, the Sylvan, and the Avari.
Okay. My next question was, I was kind of disappointed with Galadriel's brother's death. Now, he seemed kind of important as the episode went on, but when we then got to him dying, he just kind of was in a big battle and that was it. There was nothing around it. And I remember we had discussed before, when you when we saw the trailers, that he was important as an elf. He was high up, and he died in quite a dramatic way in the lore.
Yeah.
But he didn't in this, or we didn't see it.
So that is very easily described, because something that we all now know very clearly, Amazon does not have any of the rights to the Silmarillion, Unfinished Tales, Children of Húrin, Beren and Luthien, The Fall of Gondolin, any of the First Age texts. All they have is the appendices to the Lord of the Rings, and which there's some other agreements with the Tolkien estate, to my knowledge, where they've come to them and said, look, can we please show this, because otherwise the story fails totally. And they've said, all right, go on then. But Finrod is one of those things. So Finrod's story is far more interesting. He dies in a really noble way in Sauron's dungeons, which would give it even more backstory, because he is killed in Sauron's dungeons. So Galadriel would hate Sauron a bit more than normal. But he's killed in a more dramatic and heroic way, defending Beren, the famous human from the First Age, and he gives up his life so that Beren will live, and he kills a werewolf. But they can't show that because they don't have the rights to it. So in the appendices, all we see, we don't even have Tales of Years for the First Age in the appendices, I don't think. So all they can say is, her brother died. Which is also why they didn't bother telling us that she actually has two other brothers who also died, but their storyline is not important for the show, so I can see why they've not bothered with that. But Finrod should have had a better story, but they couldn't show it.
Okay. Moving on to the Harfoots. Now, they are clearly hobbits or something related to hobbits, but we haven't called them hobbits. So I was just wondering, are they a type of hobbit, or do they evolve? Do hobbits evolve from Harfoots? Like, because they always they zoomed in on their feet, which are hairy, which is a telltale sign. So they're small. So
they're proto-hobbits is what I've seen people on the internet describing them as, which is quite apt. So the hobbits that we know in the Third Age are the final form of the hobbits, if you will, but they don't evolve, they just kind of move, they migrate, which is again something that the show does show them doing. But at this point of Tolkien's story, the hobbits are not featured at all. They've never been mentioned yet, they've never been written about, they're totally unknown. They don't come into the story until the Third Age. So after this whole series has finished is the first time hobbits are actually written about. But hobbits, again, like the elves, are broken down into families. I can't remember them all, but Harfoots is one, Proudfeet, Baggins, obviously. So the families, there's a very, very detailed family tree in the back of the Lord of the Rings, which is not interesting at all unless you love hobbits. But I thought it was really dull. But Tolkien absolutely loved them. And he wrote this detailed family tree for them. And Harfoots is one of the families. So if you think of them like royal families, obviously ours is Saxe-Coburg Gotha, although they changed their name to Windsor. But it's just that kind of thing. So there's families of hobbits. Harfoots is one such family. And the Amazon show has evidently, somewhere along the line, someone has said it's not Lord of the Rings if there aren't hobbits in it. So they've decided to create this hobbit creation sort of thing, proto-hobbits, Neanderthal-esque era hobbits. But the hobbits do move from east to west in the story, but they don't feature at this time. So everything about the hobbits is entirely Amazon's decision.
So the Shire is not a thing right now? No,
gods no. The Shire is just a nothing at the moment. It's just an empty bit of land. There might be some humans there. Humans kind of live all over, but it's nothing at the moment.
Okay. Moving on to Elrond, we meet him, and I quite like his character currently. But I thought Elrond was a lord. I thought he was, they make reference to the fact that he can't go to a meeting in the show, that he's not welcome and he's not allowed to go. Obviously, he's writing the speech that Gilgalad says later. But I thought he was important. It sounds not that he's not important, but I thought he was like Galadriel. He was like a royal person because he's in the Fellowship and in all the Rings films. He's really important.
So he becomes important because, again, of his bloodline. But at this point, he's young at the moment, for a start, depending on where the show actually starts. And again, this is where the chronology is just so thrown out. So he's younger at the moment for an elf. He's only, depending on where the show starts, he's only either sort of 50 or possibly 2,500. It depends on what the show does with the timeline. But he is from a very high and noble family. His father and mother are incredibly notable. Eärendil is one of the most interesting characters in the story. And of course, the Silmaril stays with Eärendil, if you know that, but that's tangential. So he is of a high noble family. He is a lord. So if you think of the elves like the royal family, you've got the royals, and then underneath them you've got the lords and ladies who own large tracts of land. And Elrond would be one of those lords. So if the royal family died, his family would be in line to the throne. But he'd need a lot of other people to die. But so he is noble. But at the moment they're portraying him as he's too young. He's not come to his full sort of strength yet, as it were. He's still learning. So that's why he's not as prominent as he might have been. Okay,
so you answered my next question, which was around how old is Elrond. So he's young. He looks young, and I get that, like he is young, but obviously elves age very, very slowly physically. But he is actually young, like in comparison to Galadriel, who also looks very young.
Yeah,
they're not the same age? Galadriel is older.
No. Galadriel is considerably older. She's about 2,000 years older. 2,000. That's circa, but yeah, averagely she's about 2,000 years older than him. So Elrond is born at the very end of the First Age, 532, I want to say, and the First Age ends in 590, I think. Again, forgive me for not knowing these things off the top of my head, but roughly. So if this show starts day one of the Second Age, Elrond is like, whatever that is, 60, which is a child for an elf. Elves don't come into like adulthood till they're 150, I think, 200, something like that. So he's very much a child if that's true. But if the show's got dealing with the downfall of Númenor, which happens at the end of the Second Age, which is 3,000 years later. So if we assume that it's sort of blurring it and miffing it, then maybe he's a couple of thousand years old, but he's still, whatever happens, he's still 2,000 years younger than Galadriel, which is why it is a bit weird that they look so similar. But of course, as you say, elves are immortal, and once they reach adulthood, they stay looking like that forever, unless they endure great hardship, because they don't age like humans do. They only age if their life is difficult and troublesome. And Galadriel at that point, she would just look a little older. That's my only and as I say, we're not going to criticize the show in anything, but I didn't think it showed that they are actually significantly different in age sort of well enough, particularly because Elrond marries Galadriel's daughter, but at the moment you'd think they're the same age.
Yeah, that was going to be another one. Was obviously it implies that they're very close friends, and they have, I mean, they may just be how they welcome each other, I don't know, they could just be very tactile people, but it kind of insinuates that there's something a little bit more, and we're not going to analyze and go into that or anything like that, but obviously in the lore Elrond marries her daughter, so they would be friends, but they may not be that close. So in the lore they weren't. Well, yeah,
they're good. They're close. They don't really have any like adventures together, but they're close, and yeah, they would be friends. There's no reason they wouldn't be. That's all fine.
Yeah.
But no, they're not lovers. I mean, that's another point of interest as well, is Celeborn, which is Galadriel's husband. Now, I probably should have started this whole episode by saying there's going to be spoilers if they're going to follow the books, because this is just a spoiler. But Galadriel marries Celeborn, and by this point in the story, they've been married for about 1,000 years, I think. And they've already had their daughter, if memory serves. Whereas obviously the show's decided to omit that. Although I have seen a lot of people saying Celeborn is going to be in the show, and they are going to show their like courtship. But well, I don't know. It's just interesting to see. But no, Galadriel and Elrond are never lovers.
Linden is mentioned a lot. Now, forgive me, but I have never heard of Linden. I don't think it was mentioned. No, we discussed this. Bear with me. 2 parts. So, is Linden like a city, or is Linden a place, like a area?
It's a place, an area. It's a geographical region named by the elves. Excuse me, sorry.
Okay.
Yeah, so Linden is like, it's not a country with defined borders, but it is a geographical region. So like the Black Forest in Germany or the Alps. But obviously a more inhabited place. Or it's more, maybe a better analogy would be the steppe. So when we talk of like the Eurasian steppe, vast grasslands running forever and ever, it's a bit more like that in that no one owns the steppe. It's not a political entity, but it is a geographical one. But then it does straddle that line of political geographical because Linden is populated only by elves. And I suppose it is a bit more similar to somewhere like Gondor, which is a political country, a political entity, rather than a geographical region. Like the Gondor isn't a place on the map. It consumes many other places on the map, and it becomes like England, or France, or Spain, or Germany, or whatever. So Linden kind of straddles that border between a geographical thing like the steppe or a country like Kazakhstan.
And do we visit Linden in the Fellowship? So would I have seen it?
Yeah.
In
The Grey Havens is the capital of Linden, the primary city in that region, and that's where the third film ends, with the boat setting off into the sunset.
Right, and then Rivendell is much further away from. Is Rivendell a thing at the moment?
No. So Rivendell's not been founded yet. It's nothing. There's nothing there, and Rivendell is an outpost, considerably further to the east of Linden. But the Eregion at the moment is very close to Rivendell. And Rivendell is founded, in essence, by the people fleeing Eregion.
We're going to... I have questions for Eregion for episode 2. So don't say anything, please.
Very well.
Why do the humans and the elves hate each other so much?
Well, humans and elves don't hate each other. But the two groups of humans that we'd seen by... well, episode 3, I suppose. The humans that Arondir's storyline is based around are supposed to be the descendants of the humans that sided with Morgoth. So like the elves, all the humans were broken down into houses, and one of those houses betrayed the others and sided with the enemy. They became just evil. And they decided to do that at the worst possible moment during a battle. They betrayed the other forces of good. So those humans are hated by the elves because they're literally enemies. So that makes sense. And then I suppose the Númenórean one is best covered in the next episode of this, because at this point for these podcasts we haven't actually met Númenor yet.
Yeah, that's true. So is that why they have the outpost stationed where it is? Because that, on the map when we were looking at it, is really far from Linden.
Yeah, that's just Amazon. That's just Amazon. The elves did not have an outpost in Mordor. They didn't have elves running around in Mordor. I mean, they might have done. It's in that blurry area where Tolkien doesn't describe anything. The Second Age has very little written about it. It's very underdeveloped of the 3 ages, or it's the least developed of the 3 ages. So the elves might have sent someone down to Mordor, but they've got no reason to. They didn't know anything was happening over there. They didn't chase down the humans that fought against Morgoth. Everyone fled Beleriand when it sank beneath the sea, elves and humans alike. And they all just made it to Middle-earth and were more worried about setting up their lives in the wake of this giant cataclysmic war that just happened. So they weren't too bothered anymore about petty squabbles about who fought against who before that massive world-altering war took place. So at this point, the elves wouldn't really care about the humans. The humans might still hold a grudge because they do follow Morgoth now. But that's all there really is to it.
Okay, the humans were scattered about Middle-earth, or did they all wake up in one place?
Much like the elves, when they, at the beginning I said about how the elves went on the journey and some of them broke off, the humans did exactly the same, but rather than going on a journey, they spread out, like humans would have done in our own time. So they awoke in the east at a place called Halifirion. No, that's the hill that Elendil's buried on. Oh, massive spoiler alert. I can't remember what their birthplace is called. The elves awoke at Cuavinen, but I can't remember what the human one's called. It begins with an H. Anyway, they awoke in the east, far to the east of Middle-earth, not anywhere on any map. And they, rather than make one journey and then broke off from the journey, they just spread out like a plague, really. So there are humans all over. They live everywhere already.
Okay. Were they already there when the elves arrived in Middle-earth?
No, the elves woke first. So when the elves woke up, there were no humans. and then the humans woke up many thousands of years later.
So they woke up partway through the war that they were already.
Yeah, so they woke up during the elves' like ongoing troubles with Morgoth, and then by the time the humans arrived in the west, the elves and Morgoth had already fought a number of battles, and then the humans then joined in, and they fought together and then against one another for some of them. Yeah.
Okay. Why can't humans and elves be together? There's a big thing about the fact that Arondir is taking a liking to the healer, but his comrade makes a huge deal about the fact that he's having to keep an eye on him as well as their actual duty. Yeah. So why can't they be together?
It's just a logistical question. If I'm immortal and you only live for 80 years, I'm going to be disappointed. You are going to die, and I am going to live on.
So there's not like a law.
There's no. They can be together, and physically it works, as we know, because Elrond is half elven. But no, it's a purely practical point. If we had a friend who was an elf and he decided he was going to fall in love with a human, you would just say, like, "Are you sure you want to do that? Because in about 80 years, you're going to be really sad. And what are you going to do then? Spend the rest of your life pining after someone who died 1,000 years ago." So it's just a practical point. Okay. There's no, and for the show as well, they're going to ham it up, aren't they? So that it's like forbidden love, because then everyone's going to be more interested in it. But
yeah. My following on to that was, what are the two occasions that he mentions that ended in tragedy? Obviously, Elrond is half an elf, half human. Yeah. So he obviously has parents. One is a human, one is a elf.
Well, no, it's a little more complicated than that. Elrond's parents are both half human and half elf. So right. He's like, whatever that is, a complicated equation. But yeah, they mention about it ending in tragedy, but Beren and Luthien are the most famous human-elf pairing in the story, mostly because everyone loves the fact that Tolkien thought of himself as Beren and he thought of his wife as Luthien. And indeed, everyone's seen the image that on their grave, he literally has it inscribed, J.R.R. Tolkien, Beren, and then his wife with Luthien written underneath.
That's really cute.
And so Beren and Luthien are really famous, and yes, they do die. Luthien is an elf who gives up her immortality to be with Beren, and eventually they die. And humans, in Tolkien's Legendarium, we don't know what happens to humans when they die, but we do know what happens to elves. So from an elf's perspective, if another elf dies, they will see them again because they'll see them in Valinor. So death is a bit muted for elves. But for humans, they go forever. You never see them again. They go somewhere. We just don't know. And so Luthien gives up her immortality, and in essence, she dies for good. So that's why an elf would caution another elf about lying with a human, because if for some reason, if they have the same story as Beren and Luthien, and she manages to lose her immortality, then that's really bad for an elf. If you know you're going to live forever, you want your friend to live forever with you. You don't want them to die in about 80 years' time. The other one is Tuor and Idril, who also... Idril was an elf and Tuor was a human. But they don't have a sad occasion, so that, I think, is just written up for the show. Both of them survive, and Tuor is actually ascended to immortality. He's the only human that is. So, well, Eärendil, arguably, but Eärendil's not a full human, so that's by the by. But so Tuor and Idril's relationship doesn't end badly, but Beren and Luthien's does. So you can see why they would lean on that.
Can every elf give up their mortality? Or is... No.
It's a very unique circumstance that lets Luthien decide to be a human.
Right, and then because of their lineage, that's why Elrond and then Arwen.
Yeah, so Elrond and Arwen, and then his sons as well, who hopefully we might meet, but because they've never been on the show before. But Elrond is allowed to choose whether he'll be a human or an elf, and so is his twin brother Elros, as we, again in episode 3, we now know, although we did already. But they're allowed to choose whether they be a human or an elf because of the deeds of their father, because their father gave... he sacrificed a lot, potentially even death, to save Middle-earth, and so the Valar rewarded him for that by saying, we will let you and your family decide if they want to be elves and live forever with the rest of us. And he and his wife both chose to be elves. Elrond chose to be an elf, but as we know, Arwen and Elros both chose to be humans.
I would be absolutely gutted if my twin chose to not be immortal. I think that would destroy me.
Yeah.
But anyway, that's not me. Moving on to just Elrond. Elrond says that Galadriel's passed beyond his sight. Say that again.
Nothing. No. Carry on.
If I said something wrong.
Well, you said says. Like.
Says, I said.
Says. Says. This isn't north of the gap. Jesus.
Elrond. And how would you say that?
Well, Northerners say says, and it's wrong, objectively so. And we say says, because that's correct.
I said says.
Continue.
I feel like I'll
You definitely said says. You can listen to it back.
Okay.
You can continue.
He says that Galadriel has passed beyond his sight.
Mm-hmm.
Now, in the Fellowship and the Lord of the Rings films, he has, well, in series, he has like premonitions, or he can see into the future, or he can sense what's going to happen. Yes, no?
He's sort of. So in the show where he says she's passed beyond his sight, he literally just means I can't see her anymore. Elves are long-sighted. That is one of their physical attributes. They have better sight than humans. But it is said that Elrond is sort of far-sighted. He's kind of got the gift of prophecy, but not anything concrete. So in the show, it really is just he literally can't see her anymore. In the same way that Legolas, everyone knows Legolas's famous lines, and he says they're taking the hobbits to Isengard, and he's literally just standing on a rock, and no one can see anything, but it's just because he can see. Them. He can just see that far.
We spoke about something that is that when Aragorn is trying to sense where they've gone or someone's coming, and then Legolas is like, yeah, no, I can see them coming there. I've known that for a while.
No. It's different. When Aragorn says, Legolas, what do your elf eyes see? And he says, Uruk's turned northeast. They're taking the hobbits to Isengard.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Is Valenor like a type of heaven for the elves?
No, it's an island. It's just an island like anywhere else. And then, owing to some actions that we may or may not see in this series, it's then removed from the physical realm. But so at that point, I suppose you could say it kind of is like an elven heaven. But at the moment, right now, it's just an island on the world.
Right. So when Galadriel and her crew are then going towards Valinor, they're obviously in the show, they're kind of dissipating into the clouds. In the lore, if you go to Valinor, can you not come back, or can you come back?
You could go. You could go and come freely. So that is a bit of the show that's a bit iffy, because at that point you would just be able to sail there. The reason Galadriel can't sail there is because she's been banned, and not because Gilgalad says who goes to Valinor or not. She's been banned. She literally can't go there. But the show decided not to bother with that, and I think because that opens too much of a can of worms. Like, I don't want to get into it here about why Galadriel is banned. If you're interested, ask in the comments and I'll type it out. But needless to say that because of the deeds of Feanor, one of the most famous elves in history, him and his following cannot return to Valinor, although he's long dead by now. But his followers still can't go back. Galadriel is one such, and so she can't go back. But the show takes a different angle with it.
Is Valinor where Frodo goes at the end with Bilbo?
Yeah, it is, yeah. He dies there, though. He doesn't get immortality.
He just gets to hang out and enjoy it.
Yeah, he just goes and has a little bit of peace before he kicks the bucket.
Do hobbits live longer than humans?
No, they live about the same. So that's why it's so remarkable that Bilbo is celebrating his 111th birthday.
Yeah, because he shouldn't be. Is Gilgalad magical? Because when he picks up that leaf and he stares at it in this seems bad, does he know or can sense that where that's come from, or is it literally just this is a bad omen?
It's just this is a bad omen. Yeah.
And Gilgalad's not magical?
No, he's just the High King at the moment. Well, strictly speaking, he's the High King of the Noldor in exile, but again, the show didn't bother with the full title.
He's just the High King.
So he's just the High King of the Noldor in Middle Earth, but some of them stayed in Valinor and they have a different king.
Okay. Now, a mysterious person falls to Earth in a meteor, or it might not be a meteor, they just fall to Earth. Now, we're not going to discuss who that might be as such.
Well, we don't know.
Yeah, we don't know at the moment, but there's lots of speculation about who that will be, and
I mean that literally. Like, even I, who study the lore a great deal, have no idea who the Meteor Man is. So that covers that. But what's your question on it?
That's not my question. So my questions was A, how did the wizards get to Middle Earth?
Oh, they sailed in a boat.
They sailed. Oh, all of them, or they one by one?
All of them. I think the blue wizards came a little earlier, if memory serves, but no, they just sailed in a boat.
And okay.
They landed in Mithlond, which is the place in Linden that we saw at the end of the Return of the King.
And they would have had their little ranking as to who when they arrived.
Yeah.
Okay, and then way back when, how did Sauron get to Middle Earth?
Oh, he just walked, I suppose.
From above?
So no, from Beleriand. So Beleriand is the land that the First Age's story takes place in. It's to the northwest of Middle-earth, and again, Jess is hopefully showing a map. And at the end of the First Age, Beleriand is destroyed, and anyone who survives that destruction just moves to Middle-earth, and Sauron is the same. So initially he is captured by the Valar, and he's genuinely afraid of them. But the Valar are just they're in many ways they're almost as bad as Morgoth. And rather than just forcing him to come back to Valinor with them, they basically ask him if he'll come back, and he thinks, no, actually, I don't think I will. So he just leaves. He just walks into Middle Earth. I mean, he can probably fly. He can shapeshift. So I doubt he actually walks. It's a bit laborious if you can be anything you want. So I assume he became, I don't know, a cloud or a flock of bats or maybe a giant bird or something. But he just moved across.
Why would you be a cloud?
Well, a cloud can go anywhere and is indistinguishable. It can't be hunted, can it? I mean, we're getting off tangent.
Yeah,
but he came to Middle Earth just of his own accord.
Okay. Well, they were all my questions for episode 1. I think that was everything that I'd quizzed you on immediately after the show.
Yeah. But you can roll into 2. We'll do 1 and 2 in 1.
Yeah. So I'll go straight into 2. We see Eregion when Eregion.
You have to try and roll your R as well.
I'm not going to because it'll be embarrassing, and we'll just accept that I can't.
All R's are rolled. Okay,
well, that's why you're here. What happens to Eregion in the Fellowship? Because we don't see it, do we? We don't. It's not spoken of as if.
I feel like it's probably best to just not mention that because the show is going to tell you exactly what happens to Eregion.
Okay.
So just calm that one for now. You'll get your answer just by watching the show.
Okay, fine. They mentioned the Silmarils. What are the Silmarils in a nutshell?
Well, very briefly, they're 3 jewels. They're the most fantastic things ever created, and much of the war between the elves and Morgoth happens because of those 3 jewels. Morgoth looks at them, and he's so covetous of them that he steals them. And the creator of them, Feanor, who I already just mentioned, is so in love with these jewels he created that he swears a blood oath not to let anyone ever handle them save him and his own family, which they initially meant to mean only Morgoth. This is one of those wonderful lore LAW technicalities where they swore a blood oath and kind of assumed that it just meant we'll go and kill Morgoth and we'll get our jewels back, and him and all of his sons swear the oath. But it actually means that they end up killing quite a lot of elves and humans, slaughtering many of them to get these jewels back. And in the end, they don't succeed. But the Silmarils are the focal point of the story of the Silmarillion, obviously, hence the name. Yep. But yeah, they're just 3 jewels. They're just 3 really amazing jewels, like nothing you've ever seen. And anyone who ever looks at them wants them.
Where are they right now?
One of them is in the ocean. One of them was cast into a fiery fissure and so is presumed destroyed. And the other one is a star in the sky.
Oh, they should have thrown them all up into the sky.
Well, they didn't have them all together, so they couldn't.
I see, so they did what they did at the time.
Yeah, okay. They did what they could.
My next question was, how long do dwarves live for? Because Durian and Elrond have a little spat about the fact that he hasn't come to see him for 20 years. But I had thought that dwarves live longer than like a human life, so 20 years wouldn't seem as significant because it would be, I don't know, like 5 years would be for a human. Yeah, so that one, it's a little... Dwarves live between 200 and 300 years. So the oldest dwarf ever, I think, is about 314, which is Durian, that we saw a little earlier. But they live about 200 to 300 years on average.
So 20 years is still significant in that obviously 20 years is still 20 years. For a dwarf, that's still a lot, potentially 10% of their lifetime. But it does also feel like they could have made it a bit longer to have more gravitas. Like 50 years for a human or a dwarf is a significant amount of time, and for an elf is nothing, is a blip in their existence. But the 20-year one I just felt was a bit too, like, if a dwarf lives for 300 years, are you really going to be that bothered if you haven't seen an elf for 20? So I felt like they should have made that longer.
Fair enough. Okay. Durian has a tree in his home, and Elrond's given him a sapling, and then they've nurtured it, and he's then grown this magnificent tree in his home. Is that the same tree as the shiny trees, or
no? So I think that's meant to be a Malon Tree, which is they're very famous trees. Lothlorien is made up of all Malon trees. They're a very unique type of tree, which are very synonymous with elves. I don't think it's a clipping of the two famous trees, which are called Laurelin and Telperion. I don't think it was one of those. If memory serves, in the show, Elrond got clipped off before he mentioned what the tree was, which is probably why you've got the question.
Yeah.
But I think it's just a Malon tree. It's just a snub of a Malon tree. Not a snub, what do they call it?
A trimming.
A trimming, yeah, of a Malon tree. And they're just a famous elven tree. You find them in Numenor, you find them, I think, in Valinor originally, and then Lothlorien becomes made up of Malon trees. And they have a grey bark, and they have, like, perpetual autumn-coloured leaves.
And it's different to the white tree.
Yeah, different, yeah.
What's the connection between Elrond and Celebrimbor? Because
there isn't really a connection. They're sort of like step cousins, almost. Celebrimbor famously is the grandson of Feanor, the most famous smith to have ever lived, as in like a craftsman smith. So Celebrimbor carries on his grandfather's tradition, and in the show they picked up the hammer, and that's the only time they mentioned Feanor. And he said, Feanor's hammer, I can't believe it, blah, blah, blah. But Celebrimbor is actually Feanor's grandson. But Elrond is sort of Feanor's grandson because he's raised by Feanor's son Maglor. So Maglor slaughters a load of elves, tries to kill Elrond's mother, but she manages to escape. And then he has like a moment of pity when he sees Elrond and Elros, and he thinks, holy hell, what have we done? We've just killed all these elves. And so he raises Elrond and Elros himself, and he is Feanor's son. So Elrond is then like Feanor's step-grandson, which would make him and Celebrimbor a bit connected, but that's very deep dive. You'd really need to know about the lore to do that. So I can see why they didn't bother mentioning it. But they're not really anything. They're not connected in any way. They've got no prior knowledge of one another, really.
Oh, okay. So
as much as... they would have heard of each other because they're both from very royal families, and Celebrimbor's uncle raised Elrond, so they probably would have known of each other, but
they wouldn't be at family dinners.
No, the Feanor family probably didn't have dinners, to be honest. They're a very troubled family. But Maglor is the only one of Feanor's children who's still alive, and he wanders the world even now. But that's where his story ends.
Well, they were all my questions of number 2, because I thought number 2 didn't open up as many.
Well, no,
boxes.
yeah, we were introduced.
Oh,
to
I did have
everything
one
in
more.
number
I did have one more. The shiny thing at the end.
Oh, in the chest.
In the chest. Is that the same thing that Smaug wants?
No. That's going to be Mithril. That's almost certainly going to be Mithril. So, given the way that the show is smudging the storylines, I think we're probably going to see the Balrog in the show, because, of course, the Balrog is what everyone knows from Moria, from the Fellowship of the Ring. So if you've never read any of the books, you've only ever seen the films, which a great many of the people watching Rings of Power probably haven't, they will only know Moria as that ruined place where Gandalf dies and the Balrog fights them on the bridge. And that Balrog was awoken by the dwarves because they delved too far into the mountain, into the ground, because Mithril was so precious and it made them so much money. So they delved and delved and delved, and they woke up the Balrog, and it wiped them out and sent them packing. Even though that doesn't technically happen till a lot later into the Third Age, another 1,000 years or so after this storyline is supposed to end, I think the show is going to bring the Balrog in, and that's why they've already shown us this, like, oh, look, Mithril. So amazing.
So do they want to keep that secret because then the elves can't mine for it as well. So then it's just their thing that they can have a
almost
monopoly on.
Yeah. That's definitely what they're going to do. They're going to be like, everyone's going to want this, so we have to protect it, and then they're going to be covetous, as dwarves often are.
And Durin's wife mentions the resonating act that they do, and then she says that it tells you where to mine and where not to mine and where to leave the mountain alone. Do you think it's going to be that something happens with that? This is speculation.
No,
obviously.
I don't. I think that was
just a fun, nice tidbit that they've said.
Yeah.
Not that they don't do that, and then that's why they go too deep, and because they haven't listened to the mountain. And
No.
That would be much better, I think.
I mean, they might do that. They're almost certainly gonna. It's just unfortunate how predictable it would be if that is the case, but. They're probably going to set it up that there'll be two factions, one saying no, we can't delve any deeper, it's going to lead to trouble, and the other's going to be like, bollocks to it, let's just get this Meteor out the mountain, and then they're going to wake up the Balrog, but we just have to wait and see. And
how they haven't got anywhere deep enough at the moment to near the Balrogs.
No.
And in these mines, they're different to all the mines that we've seen before. Are they the same mines that we've seen that were destroyed and then had goblins in them before?
Yeah.
They're the same mines.
Yeah.
Oh right, okay. So where Elrond went in, will that become the fancy door, or is that the different?
Yeah. So Celebrimbor helps build that door, and hopefully they will actually show that. But it would be so niche. Like, people like me would love it if they showed Celebrimbor building that door, because the dwarven runes on the door say Celebrimbor of Eregion drew these runes, and I, Narvi, built the door, or crafted this, or built this. Can't remember the ending bit. But so it would be a really cool nod to all of us lore fans if Celebrimbor actually helps build the door. But that's probably something they're not going to bother with.
How come there's a lake there now?
Well, because thousands of years have passed with no one living there. So it's just a lake now.
Just a lake now. Okay.
There's no specific reason. Tolkien doesn't say, and then a lake came into being. Like, there's a lake in the Third Age, and there isn't at this point. There might already have been a lake by now, but I don't know.
Well, they were standing. There wasn't a lake.
There wasn't a lake when they were there. No. But no, I don't know. But that's the Western Gate. Yeah. So the gate is yet to be built. Celebrimbor helps build the gate, and hopefully the show will show us that. It's not a gate, is it? It's called the Doors of Durin, but hopefully he does. But we just won't know.
So it would have been built in Durin's time.
Well, there's 7 Durins, so
right, that's confusing.
The Durin the First is the father of the Longbeard clans. So again, Tolkien massive on families. Every dwarf is one of 7 different clans. The clan that we see almost exclusively in every work of Tolkien's is the Longbeards, and they are founded by a dwarf called Durin, who's famous because he woke up on his own. Because obviously there's 7 of them, but the other 6 were laid in pairs, and then they woke up in pairs. But Durin woke up on his own, and he founds Khazad-dûm. That's his place. After looking in the Mirrormere, which is another lake, he sees a crown above his head, and he founds Khazad-dûm. But then it's said in prophecy that there will be 7 more Durins, and so he's given the name Durin the Deathless. And the belief in dwarf nations, well, the belief of the dwarves is that he's reincarnated 6 times. So the Durin that we see is a prince at the moment, but is said to be one of these reincarnations of Durin. And then once the 7th reincarnation is done, that marks the end and the downfall of the dwarves. So they know, bugger, when we've got our 7th Durin, that means our people are going to decline.
Could they just not name them Durin?
Well, no, it's like they kind of all just know when a Durin's been born. It's like, this one is another Durin, so it's like, bugger.
Right.
But the 7th one doesn't come till way after the story ends. So this Durin, I think, and this is again where off the top of my head knowledge lets me down, I think this is the 4th Durin, but I could be very wrong. It's either the 4th or the 6th.
That's very too
Well, there's only 2 gaps apart, but I can't remember off the top of my head, I'm afraid. That's very specific, but I don't know which one it is. But it's not, the 7th Durin isn't born until after the Return of the King concludes. So we never meet that Durin. So this is either the 6th one, and then there's just thousands of years of no other Durin, or it's the 4th. I feel like it is the 6th, but I can't remember that off the top of my head. Sorry.
So his dad's not a Durin.
No, I don't think his dad is. Most of the Durins live many years apart. They're born thousands of years apart. So I don't think his dad is, but again, that's where my very, very specific, because this stuff is barely written about. The dwarves are the least developed of all the races in the Lord of the Rings. Humans we know loads about. Elves we know loads about because they're the poster boys of Middle Earth. But the dwarves, Tolkien wrote so little about the dwarves, and it's so disappointing because they're the most interesting ones.
It's often the case whenever there's a dwarf in anything, really. It's the same in Skyrim. It's the same in...
Well, that's why the dwarves books are so good, because there's a whole story about dwarves, but that's different.
Different subject.
But is that all of your questions for today?
That is all my questions for today. If you did have any questions for episode 1 and 2, or you've watched 3 and you have a question for 3, then do write it below and we will do our best to answer it either in the next episode or in 4. We'll go back and then we'll answer that question if you had any questions that we don't answer. Or you have anything that's pressing, and if it's not on my list, then I'll ask that, and we can, and I'll say who's asked it. But otherwise, that was it. I hope you enjoyed it. Let us know if you like it, or if you don't. And hopefully, we will continue doing them for the. Well,
we will. But this one's slightly longer, as I say. The others hopefully will be about half an hour, but this one was 2 episodes in one. But yeah, as Jess says, post your comments down below. We will record episode 3 before we see your comments for episode number 1, I'm afraid. So they might be answered later. But do post your comments down below and we'll get round to them. And but otherwise, that's it for now. Thank you very much for watching, if indeed you have. And do stay tuned for other coverage of Rings of Power. And just very briefly on another side, I know there's been a long time on the channel where I seem to have taken a gap from the last Dol Amroth or Bree video, and at the moment consider them on hiatus, and that's all I shall say for now. But until we speak again, dear friends, Nevair Neden Perimad Melonin, and farewell.